Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administrator exam. In a previous video we talked about the root account and how the root account gives you elevated privileges to pretty much do anything on your system. And we accessed it in one of two ways. We accessed it either remotely by logging in directly under the root account, which should be disabled from a security perspective, or we SU'd or super usered to that particular user, and as long as we knew the root password, we were able to become the root user on our system. Now there's another method of controlling access to the root account, and that's the sudo command. And the sudo command stands for SUDO or super user do. It allows you to do one set of commands on a single command line as a particular user, as long as you have the appropriate permissions from the administrator. So in other words, I can execute commands with elevated privileges as though I was a super user or the root user for a single command if I'm allowed to in the appropriate configuration file. I can also become the root user using the sudo command directly rather than just doing a plain old SU. So let's take a look at what some of those things mean. So if I'm logged in as my user and I want to execute a command, for example, if I want to do sudo and cat etc or var log dmessage, I'm going to get prompted for a password for the user. Now this is my password. So my password must then indicate that I have the ability to run super user commands as an elevated privilege. And in my case, the user is not in the sudoers file, and an actual email is generated and sent to the root user of the system. Well, what is the sudoers file? Well, the sudoers file is a special configuration file like etc password or etc group that contains elevated privilege information. And there's a couple of ways that a user can be added to the sudoers file. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We'll log back into our root user and we go to the sudoers file. So let's edit the sudoers file. And I caution you that even as the root user, you want to use a utility called vi sudo to edit the sudoers file rather than vi or vim. And that's because if you bork the sudoers file, you can prevent any user from logging in, whereas vi sudo will at least check to be sure that you haven't done anything to save the sudoers file that will prevent user login. So we're going to do vi sudo on the sudoers file. And we see that there's some stuff here. And the thing is that root always has all permissions. Now, there are two ways that we can add permissions for a particular user. So for example, if I want to allow the user called user to have all permissions the same way that root does, I can simply add them with this line item here. And when I go ahead and escape and save this file, we'll see that now if I exit and log back into my account as the user, if I want to execute sudo cat /var log dmessage, which is a privileged file in a system directory, I'll be prompted for the password. I'll be prompted for the password for my account, which will give me the ability to run the command with elevated privileges so that I actually which will allow me to run the command with elevated privileges so that I actually run it as a super user. Now this particular user has been added specifically to the sudoers file so that I have the ability to run commands as root. Now I can also, by doing a sudo su dash, I'm running the su command sudo, and I've already put in my password for my user that indicates I can run elevated commands. So I can now become the root user without having to know the root password. And this is actually the most common way for users to become the root user. And the reason being is you don't want to necessarily propagate the root password to the users of your system. You want them to give them elevated privileges using their own account from a compliance and an audit perspective, and then to become the root user. This is also a way, if you happen to forget the root user password, that you can recover it if you happen to have any other privileged user on the system. Because if you do a sudo su and become root, then you can simply issue the password command here and reset your password. There is another way to add users to the system. So let's su to our root account directly, and we'll go back to Etsy, and we'll do a vi sudo. And there are certain groups that can be given sudo rights if you're a member of a particular group. Now, members of the admin group may gain root privileges, allow members of the group sudo to gain privileges. Those are already set up, so I can add a user to this. Let's delete this particular user here, and we'll go ahead and save the file. And cat etsy sudoers. We see that the file changes have been made. We'll exit out, exit, log back in, and we'll see that I should no longer be able to sudo into the root user. I'm not in the sudoers file. So now the way that I can handle that, and again, a more common method for adding multiple users to the sudoers file would be to add them to the group. So if I go to the groups directory or the groups file and I do a vi on group, then if I find the sudo user or group, all I have to do is add the user to that group, and then when I log back in, I should then have the ability to once again sudo. So sudo su dash, and then my password allows me to become root. So both of these methods are perfectly appropriate for accessing the root account. You're going to be using the sudoers file either as a group of users added to the Etsy group file or added directly to the sudoers file with the appropriate permissions. And you can also indicate whether the user has to present their own password prompt or they can just execute the command. Always leave the command because it reminds you that you're running in elevated privilege mode. That's all there is to accessing the root account using sudo. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.